Hola clase. Aquí está una lección sobre algunos verbos nuevos, some new verbs. So here we go. This is just going to be some notes that we're taking on some new verbs, and there's a little worksheet that will go with this. So for your homework assignment, I expect you to show up with these notes that you're taking right now, as well as your responses to the homework assignment. So today's notes are, these notes are going to be covering the last bit of new material that we have for the semester, and that's going to be stem changing verbs. Okay, stem changing verbs. They're actually not the newest thing in the world to us. We've already talked about stem changing verbs before in the past. We've called them boot verbs. A stem changing verb or a boot verb, they're the same thing, is a verb that changes spelling in the stem. Now, when we talked about the boot verbs or stem changing verbs before, we used the verb querer, which we know in English means to want. So querer is the verb we're going to use as an example today as we begin the talk or begin the discussion of stem changing verbs. If you take a look at this verb, we're going to first need to find the stem of the verb because that's where the change is going to happen. Now the stem of the verb is what you're left with when you removed either the AR, the IR, or the ER. So in this case we're going to drop this ER and we're left with querer, Q-U-E-R. So that's the stem for this verb. Now, like I said, there's a spelling change in the stem. That's what makes it a stem changing verb. So this type of stem changing verb is classified as what we call an E to an IE verb. They also write it sometimes like this, E to IE. Either way, you're going to take the E, the first E in this one, or the E in the stem, and then you're going to change it to an IE. So if you think about this verb querer, and you begin to conjugate it in your head, starting with the yo form, you see where that spelling change happens. So let's start with yo. And I'm going to begin by starting to spell out this word here, just the stem. I've got Q, and then I've got U. And I know when I get to the E, I'm going to make a spelling change because that's what it says over here, and we know that it's a stem changing verb. So the E is going to go to an IE or E to IE. These are both the same thing. They're just written different ways. So let's say, here's this E. We need to make it an IE, so we go IE, R. And then you're just going to keep the same ending that you would keep for an ER verb in the yo form. So that's going to be yo quiero. Now for two, the same thing. Begin by writing the stem. We know we're going to have a stem change here, or a spelling change. It's going to go from an E to an IE. And then we'll finish the verb just like we would any other ER verb. So it's going to have an ES on the end, quieres. I'm going to try with el, and we know that the el, ella, usted form, they all go together, but I'm just going to write el. That one becomes el quiere. And then over here, nosotros. Now this is the interesting part about stem changing verbs. Nosotros. They only change spelling in the area that the boot is formed. So I'm going to spell this one out for us. Nosotros queremos. Notice here that there's no spelling change at all. All right, and I'll finish it up with the ellos form, which is also the ellas form or the ustedes form, and it becomes quieren. Again, we go back to the spelling change. That's because it's a boot verb. A boot verb is a verb that fits in the boot, and everything that's inside of the boot has the spelling change. So we've got the E to IE, E to IE, E to IE, E to IE. So those are the spelling change inside the boot. Outside of the boot, there's no spelling change. So this is a stem changing verb. A stem changing verb is a verb that changes spelling inside the stem. So I'll double underline there. Inside that stem is where the change is going to happen, and we have this over here to kind of help us signify what change is going to happen inside there. And the boot goes around all of the changes, and the boot helps us kind of visualize where the changes are not. The changes are not going to ever happen in the nosotros form. They also never happen in the vosotros form, which is what would go here, but we don't use the vosotros form in the United States. We don't use it in this class. It's used more in Spain. So the nosotros form, as well as the vosotros form, never change in spelling in their stems. So that's a stem changing verb for you. Let's take another one to practice with, and I think it's another one that we're all pretty familiar with. If you think about how to say, ¿Cómo se dice en español starts? Or how about, let's give it a subject, ¿Cómo se dice the class starts? And think about it. And think about playing actividad en línea. Before we begin the activity, we say, before we begin the stopwatch, we say en 3, 2, 1, empieza. Well, that empieza, that means starts. In that case, we mean the team starts or the class starts. So empieza comes from the infinitive empezar. And empezar means to start or to begin. So empezar is also a stem changing verb, and it follows the same kind of stem change as querer. So we know that just because I just said it, but also I'm going to jot this down here to remind me where I want to make that change, the E to IE change. So empezar is the stem changing verb. We're going to go ahead and try and conjugate it here in the yo form. First of all, you need that stem, so chop off the AR. The stem is like empiece or something like that. You take a look inside empiece and you see there's an E. That second E, that's the one that's going to change in spelling. So I'm going to begin by writing and then I get to the E and I know it's going to change. And so it goes from an E to an IE. Empiezo. So again, I'm going to keep the same ending that would go for the yo form of any AR verb. So the first conjugation is yo empiezo. While I go ahead and jot these down, you try and conjugate the rest of this verb on your own. Okay, I'm coming back up to the to form. I've got my stem, MP, but I've got to make that change where the E goes, so it's going to become empiezas. And then here, the él, ella, usted form, again, I'm just writing L, but we know that it goes for all three of those subject pronouns, empieza. So that's where we get empieza when we say begin or start. La clase empieza, el equipo empieza. Okay, up to the nosotros form. Now, the nosotros form does not go inside the boot. It does not change in stem. So that one's just going to stay nosotros empezamos. So that's no change here. And then now we're back inside the boot. I haven't drawn the boot yet, but you know that we're inside the boot here, and that is empiezan. Empiezan. So again, I'll draw my boot around. All of the spelling changes happen inside this boot. They happen in the boot because they are stem change. It's a stem changing verb. And the stem changes only with these forms. It never changes with a nosotros form or the vosotros form for that case. All right, this time I'm going to give you one more stem changing verb that follows this same pattern. And that verb you are hopefully familiar with by now is pensar. In English, I hope you know that pensar means to think. And you can go ahead and think about, You can go ahead and think about how that verb would be conjugated just off the top of your head. But what I want you to do is go ahead and write out the conjugation for pensar on your notes page. And I will be checking for that when you get to class, when I see you again. So here is where the boot goes. Now you just go through and conjugate pensar. Remember that it's an E to IE verb. So you just need the root or the stem, and then you make the change with that E that's inside the stem. Now, I mentioned before that there are other types of stem changing verbs. So I'm going to grab my highlighter. I'm going to box these in because this is all one type. These are all E to IE stem changing verbs. Now, there are two more types that I want to tell you about. I'm going to run through the two other types a little bit more quickly than we did with the first. So again, a stem changing verb is a verb that changes spelling in the stem. And we know these verbs as boot verbs because you can draw a boot around the versions of this verb that have the change, and the versions of the verb that do not have the change, they stay outside the boot. So the boot is just to help us visualize the changes, and it's easier to say boot verb than stem changing verb. At this point in the lesson, I assume that some people have probably skipped to the end to get the final results of the note page. If you're still listening, go ahead and draw a little smiley face at the top of your paper next to verbs. And that's a little experiment that I'm going to try to see if anyone skipped through the lesson. All right, like I said, I'm going to go through these very quickly. All right, so stem changing verbs. We already know what a stem changing verb is. Here's a different type of stem changing verb. I'm going to use this infinitive here, poder, as my example. Poder is a verb that you're familiar with. It means to be able to, or just can. So if you think about how to say I can or can I in Spanish, you might get the gist of where this change is going to happen. Now this type of stem changing verb is an O to UE verb. O to UE. All right, so first thing we need to do is find our stem. We're going to chop off the ER. It becomes pod, so the yo form. Begin writing my stem. I know the O is going to change to the UE, so I make that change. Yo pue. And then I'm going to finish the verb just like I would any other ER verb. Yo puedo. Go ahead and fill in what you think would be the rest of this verb while I jot down my subject pronouns. Ellos. All right, so I've got my yo puedo, to, make that change to UE, DES, because that's the ending for an ER verb. Él, ella, puede. All right, nosotros. Now this one's going to be outside the boot, so remember we're not making any sort of change. Nosotros podemos. Looks like that. Podemos. And then back down into the boot, the ellos, ellas, ustedes form. It's going to be pueden. Now, I'm just finishing the verb up again with the endings that we would normally put on any ER verb. So this is a U or O to UE verb, and I will give you just one more because I would like for you to practice your own O to UE stem changing verb with the infinitive dormir. Clase, ¿qué significa dormir? Sleep. All right, so now you should go ahead. I've got my boot. Let me put my boot around poder. All right, so I'm going to draw a boot for you here. Please conjugate this verb on your own on your notes page right now. And I'll be checking for that when we get back to class. These are the only two O to UE verbs that we're going to work with for this lesson. So I'm just going to draw a box around them because there's one more type of stem changing verb that I want to tell you about. Now again, I use verbs that I think that we're familiar with first. So just think about poder. It's going to be tricky to remember what this infinitive means because it doesn't look anything like puedo. All right, last type. If you're not done conjugating these, just come back to them after the notes. This is the last type of stem changing verb that I want to tell you about, and I'm flipping around to the back page because I ran out of room there. The last one that I'm going to tell you about is, now this one's probably going to be the least familiar to us, and this is kind of the reason that we were doing the stories in class with Bloque de. We did El Cuento de ¿Quién? Oh no, who was it? Lola? And then in Bloque Hey, we did El Cuento de María Camilla Dios Gana. So those two stories that we started working with, and we really, neither class got to finish. The reason that we were doing them was to get to this type of stem changing verb here. So we're going to work with this infinitive pedir. Now we mentioned in class that pedir in English means to ask, but not necessarily for information like a question. It's more like to request. So I'm going to write to request first or to ask second. And this is a verb that you would use like when you're ordering at a restaurant, when you're asking the waiter for something. or if you were going to ask someone's hand in marriage, that would be the time then you would use this verb. Now this type of stem changing verb is going to be an E to I. Well, it seems simple enough, right? So this is an IR verb, and so I know I'm going to be using the endings that an IR verb would use. Starting out with yo, my stem here is paid. When I drop off the IR, pay. So I'm going to begin writing my stem, but I know the change happens right when I get to that E. It needs to become an I. So it's going to be yo pido. O because we're talking about a yo form, and we're just following the same rules of an IR verb. Tú pides. Él pide. Nosotros. We're outside the boot, so we don't make a change. It's going to be pedimos. And then back into the boot, ellos piden. Okay, so that's the last type of stem changing verb that I want to show you, the E to I. And I want you to try to conjugate the next infinitive for me on your notes. Here we are, repetir, which means, as you might guess, to repeat in Spanish. So go ahead and conjugate repetir on your notes page. And like I said, we'll be checking for that when you get to class. So at this point, you can finish conjugating the verbs on your page. I'm going to run through a quick summary of what we just talked about. We just mentioned 3 different types of stem changing verbs. The first, or the last that we mentioned was an E to I. We also talked about an O to UE. And then we talked about 3 types of E to IE, because those are the ones that we're most familiar with. So a stem changing verb is just a verb that changes spelling in the stem. The stem of a verb is just found by chopping off the AR, ER, or IR ending, and then you'll make the change according to what type of verb it is. There is a worksheet that goes along with this activity. Remember on the worksheet that you should just write the conjugation of the verb. You do not need to write out the complete sentence. And if you would like to record your answers to that worksheet on this notes page, that's fine with me. Just know that I'm going to be looking for both notes and your answers when you get to class. Okay, gracias clases, and email me if you have any questions about what we just went over. Adios.